Hi. So I think we are live now. Welcome. My name is Dr. David Purvis, and I'm doing this because I have set up a new group called Mental Health Wizard, which is um, a different kind of group. It's not a support group in the sense that we're not really supporting people struggle and cope with their problems. What we're doing is we're trying to create a new way of doing things, which principally is that you learn to become your own therapist, which basically means you internalize all of the tools, tactics, resources, etc., that a therapist like me would use, and then they're yours. And I have to say that, hi, Gillian, well done. And I have to say that the people who do best in psychological therapy are the ones who do internalize the tools, tactics, and resources. And that means that they're able to kind of, well, they're in control, right? They don't have to have an expert to help solve their problem. And I like to say you don't have to have a pill or a psychiatrist. You definitely want psychiatrists in your life if you can help it. You know, you've got everything that you need. Now, the secret, of course, is that we have to understand what it is that we're working on. And so I put out a little post yesterday which says, "What are you working on Wednesday?" And I got lots of responses back, really good responses, and many of them were hello. Many of them were nicely focused, but a few were a little bit less focused, a little bit more diffuse. So if for instance you said that you're working on depression and anxiety, that might be true. Well, of course it's true, but it's not helpful because that's too broad a description of what it is that you're actually working on. And so what we need to do to make things useful is to reduce the complexity in them and to make them simpler. We need to um, kind of understand them from a slightly different perspective, so slightly different perspective so that we can see possibilities and solutions. So if you've got any questions, please do, put a question out on the chat and I'll do my best to answer it. This is one of those impromptu kinds of things, so I don't suppose many people will have this scheduled in their diary, but nevertheless. So I was thinking about this morning, and this kind of prompted me to do this Facebook Live as well. All societies and all civilizations, I think, move towards more complexity, not less. It would be unusual for a complex system and society to move to a simpler system and society. What typically happens is that societies and cultures, like the Romans or the Incas or whatever, they move to more and more complexity, and more complexity requires more and more resources, more and more kind of complex bureaucratic systems until their resources run out and they can't sustain more and more complexity. And then rather than say, oh, okay, we'll make things simpler, what happens is they just crash out. They go down to chaos and destruction. Now, I think that the human psyche, the human system, the mind, the brain, etc., also moves towards more complexity. And in fact, that our brain is an incredibly complex system running behind the scenes. And I have to say that I commonly liken it to a computer because you don't know what your computer is doing. You only know you only have any sense of what your computer is doing when something pops on the screen. And that's also true of your brain. You've got no idea what your brain's doing until something pops on the screen in your mind, which we might call the screen in your consciousness, which I like to talk about. So we're oblivious really to what's going on. We just simply get the outcome of the process popping onto our screen. And so you might say, oh, I'm anxious. Oh, I'm anxious. Oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I think I'm ugly. Oh, I don't like myself. Oh, I can't go out. So we're really kind of stumped because of the complexity of the system. And I also have to say that where in your life has anyone ever taught you about psychology, your psychology? Where has anyone taught you about how to have relationships, how to be a human being in society and culture? I mean, we're just not taught this. You're taught history and you're taught geography and biology and physics, but no one teaches you, in a sense, how to become your own therapist. Well, until now, but no one teaches you how to be able to, use your psychology in a sort of meaningful way. So, now, Your mind creates in here a version of reality, of external reality, which is different from my version of external reality. And we might well say that your version and my version have a lot of similarity. There's a lot of overlap between them. And there has to be, of course, because we can both drive cars and not get into accidents. So there has to be a lot of similarity. But your version, your internal version of reality is idiosyncratic and different from mine in subtle ways. Now, we can never know how it's different unless we can do tests. We can test your speed of reaction. We can test, whether you're colorblind or something. But in principle, we just say that your idiosyncratic version of reality is different from mine. Now, I'm assuming that you understand that all of the information that comes into your brain comes in through your senses, and therefore it comes in as coded information, which is decoded in the virtual reality simulator you call your mind. And that then is your experience of reality. So typically we say things like, you don't respond to reality, you respond to your simulation of reality. And that, that's fair enough. Now, it doesn't matter whether your simulation is virtually different from mine in a sense. The question is your simulation working for you? If your simulation is not working for you, or if your version of reality is not working for you, why might that be? That's the question, right? Because if we're thinking about complexity and simplifying things, if your version of reality is not working for you, the simulated version of reality is not working for you, you would go, well, in principle, you'd have no idea it wasn't working. You just would have the experience of life not working, of anxiety or depression or panic or stress or whatever. You just simply have the experience, and you wouldn't have any mechanism for understanding why you're having the experience. So here's a question. If your version of reality is not working, why is it? Now, I said before that the only way that you can know what a computer is doing is if you look at the screen, and there are 1,000 things going on behind the scenes of the computer. Okay, your computer runs programs, and I'm going to suggest to you that your brain runs programs. And if you've listened to my stuff before, this won't be a surprise to you. Your brain runs programs. Now, if your brain runs a program that was set up 30 years ago, potentially for good reasons, not necessarily, but potentially for good reasons. If your brain runs a program that was set up 30 years ago, but has outlived its usefulness and is no longer useful to you, but you have not told it to switch off or to stop functioning, you might find that that's a reason that you don't get the version of reality that you want. So for instance, if you grew up in a household, for instance, where there was just some criticism, just some level of criticism, people perhaps were a little bit critical of each other. It could even be, just joking in a way, just a bit critical of each other. You might grow up either learning to be critical of other people, or you might grow up learning to fear criticism because it makes you feel bad about yourself in some way. And so, for instance, if you had the negative belief, and some people were saying yesterday, Tracy said, for instance, be kinder to myself. When I said, what are you working on Wednesday? Be kinder to myself, stop negative thoughts about myself, not catastrophize and have anxiety, etc. So, if you're running a negative belief pattern, that is in principle a program that your brain is running. Now, programs give outcomes. So if you're running a program that says I'm not good enough, or I'm not attractive enough, or I'm boring, or people don't like me, or I'm a failure, if you're running a program in here that has that name, it has that sort of instruction attached to it, that program is going to run, and it's going to give you the outcome that that program gives you. And that's kind of obvious, right? So it might feel that people don't like you, or it might feel that you can't go out, or it might feel that things don't work out very well for you, or it might feel that you're, I just feel like a failure. That's the outcome. And that outcome is derived from the program running. And the program is basically saying you are a failure, you are unlovable, you are ugly, whatever. Okay. So when we experience a problem, it feels complicated because we're just simply getting the final outcome of all of the processing. But what we have to do is we have to go behind the scenes of the outcome and go, okay, so I feel like a failure. Well, I feel like a failure. So what has to be happening? What program do I have to be running for me to feel like a failure? Well, I'm not good enough. Okay. And where does that program come from? Well, it probably comes from when I was a kid. But even that bit's not so necessary. We just need to know what the program is, right? Now, if your version of reality is not working for you, that is likely to be one of the reasons why it's not working, right? You're running a program, a vestige, a heritage program that basically says something, right? Now, the trick is this. The trick is to figure out what it is that that program is telling you and to sort of decide whether it's true or not. Now, truth and accuracy are a movable feast, right? You might say something is a fact and something is not a fact. Well, facts are facts and fictions kind of interchange with each other. So, you know, we say this is a fact, but in fact, a lot of times it's an opinion or a viewpoint or a belief, right? So we kind of mix it up. But here's the judgment that I would make. Is what you believe about yourself useful to you? Now you might say, well, yeah, it's not useful, but it's true. Well, that's the question, right? Is it true? Now, let me give you this kind of extra piece of information. And this is a big thing in Mental Health Wizard, and later on in the Anxiety Wizard program when it's released, right? There are two realities. The first reality is external reality. So these books behind me are in external reality. They exist independent of my perception of them. And if I was to evaporate and just be removed from existence, those books and that bookshelf would still exist. That's external reality. Now, this in here, your virtual reality simulation, is internal reality. And external reality and internal reality are not the same thing. So here's the first question. Does your problem exist in external reality or in internal reality? What do you think? Now, if you were to say, for instance, I'm ugly, which is a kind of a fairly subjective, or I don't look good. I don't like how I look. There's sort of words around that. If you just say that, the question is your belief that you're not good looking, ugly, not good enough with respect to physical appearance, is that borne out by the facts, or is it simply your interpretation or your belief that's coming from a program that you're running? Now, it'd be very hard. It's hard for you to tell it apart, actually, because the feeling is strong. But here's the thing. If you were to ask, I mean, I'm not suggesting you do this, but if you were to ask 10 people and say, could you rate me on attractiveness? Well, people would be between 0 and sort of 10, okay? 10 is really attractive, 0 is not. But in fairness, no one's going to be 0. And in fairness, most people are going to be average because by definition, most people are average. And I have to say, I've worked with lots of these kinds of problems over the years. And the problem is not in any way, in my experience, in the entirety of my experience, the problem is not in any way an external reality problem, in the sense that someone who believes that they're not attractive enough or not good looking enough or ugly or horrible or whatever, that's not a real problem. It's not an external reality problem. They look perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable, perfectly average. If it's not an external problem, then it's an internal problem. I agree with you, I agree with you, Gillian. It's an internal problem that you have, as far as I'm aware of it. It's an internal problem. Okay, now, most people try and solve their problems using external reality solutions, which I have to say is unhelpful. And it's interesting. I was talking about this with someone today, and I read an interesting quote. Let's see if I can get it right. All wars are an attempt to simplify complex situations. So complexity can feel overwhelming, And so many of the solutions that people try to impose, external reality solutions, are attempts to simplify complex problems. So I'll throw this in just for luck, right? The Brexit referendum is a complex kind of cluster of issues, and it was simplified. Hi, Spencer. It was simplified down to in or out. And in fact, the whole political process tries to simplify complex things, but that's what it does. So politicians, people in power, etc., they're always trying to simplify or sell a simplified version of a complex thing. Make America great again is a very simple statement for a complex kind of multifaceted problem, and wearing a hat and making America great again are two different things. So complexity and complex kind of things are inherent. Okay, so in external reality, you cannot solve internal reality problems in external reality. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to decide whether the problem that you're struggling with, whatever it is an external reality problem or an internal reality problem. Now, if it's an external reality problem, I would suggest that you then apply some external reality problem solving strategies to it. So you might say, I don't like the neighborhood I live in. That to me is fundamentally an external reality problem. So you look into solutions to moving house. You might say, I don't like anybody in the area that I live. Okay. I would bet that's more of an internal reality problem. In that, you first of all don't know many people, but you're using a kind of an all or nothing thinking strategy. And that all or nothing thinking strategy is keeping you sort of trapped in the idea that I don't like anybody and they don't like me. So I'm going to avoid them. And then that creates all sorts of problems. Okay. So the first question is this: is your problem internal reality or external reality? If it's internal reality, brilliant, because that means you're entirely in charge of it. You are entirely able to resolve that problem without leaving the comfort of your chair in principle, right? Because it's an internal reality problem. Okay. Now, if it's an internal reality problem, it has the kind of additional problem of, but I feel it. What does that mean? You might feel not good enough, but actually, what does that mean? It's a hard one to get a hold of. So I've got a little exercise for you. Get a piece of paper, and in the middle of the piece of paper, just write out what you think the problem is that you're working on. And so let's say, I don't like myself. Okay, that would be the problem I'm working on. Now, what I want you to do is just draw a circle around that, and let's just do a spider diagram of the variations of that I don't like myself. Because I find that when I say to people, what's the real negative thing you believe about yourself, the actual one is not the one that they're actually working on. It's a variation of, but people just kind of throw out what it is. So I'd like you to really be clear about what it is you're working on. So write down variations, the variations that pop into your mind. So the example I'm using is I don't like myself. Okay, you could say I'm unlovable, I hate myself, I'm not attractive, I'm boring, I look horrible, people don't like me. Yeah, you've got all sorts of kind of variations of that. And I would suggest to you that the more clear you can get on the problem you're working on, the more able you are to resolve it. It's just a simple matter of when you define the problem is much easier to resolve. Okay, so I'd like you to spend just a bit of time developing this exercise and just being really, really clear, because, and this is where a therapist is handy to you, because they've got some idea of what it is they're trying to achieve, and so they can push it a bit more. But become clear on what it is you're working on, and then we're in a fantastic opportunity to resolve it. But here's the other thing: problems suck you in. I like to say problems like vacuums. They suck you into them, and they do, because the emotion sucks you into it. So I feel, yeah, you might feel, but it doesn't make it true. Okay, you might feel it, but it doesn't make it true in external reality. So we've got to just think about that. So that's kind of the sort of the main element that I'd like you to focus your attention on. Determine with clarity, with sort of real precision, what it is that you're trying to work on. Now, if you were working on something like I don't like myself, okay, an alternative to that would be to develop the ability to like yourself, to love yourself, to care for yourself, to accept who you are, and to be comfortable in your own skin. Okay, that would be the journey that you would want to make from I don't like myself to, yeah, actually, do you know what? I'm a good person. I have value. I do the best I can. I'm good. Okay, so that would be the journey you want to make. Now that journey is entirely doable if you're starting from the place that you need to be, which is actually the problem that you're working on. Okay, so we make complex solutions simple by being very clear what it is we're working on, by being very clear whether it's an external reality or an internal reality problem, and being very clear to a degree on what the problem is without the emotion sucking us into it, so we lose clarity, right? So that we're kind of recognizing it as a sort of a work in progress kind of idea, as opposed to, oh, I feel terrible and there's nothing I can do about it. We're sort of structuring it so that we can do something about it. And we have our journey. This is where I'm starting. This is where I want to get to. And then we apply the tools that we need to apply to get to that position. Okay. Now, I have to say that when you do that, it works brilliantly, right? Because it's a very simple and straightforward way to simplify complex problems. So why don't you spend the next week or so thinking about the problem that you're working on and what you want to do about it, and being very clear about it. And then we can perhaps talk again, and I'll provide some tools for you that will help you to actually challenge and change the program that you're running so that it no longer has the power to give you the experience that it's giving you. So I've talked for 21 minutes, which I think is quite sufficient on a Wednesday afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen. Please leave some comments. If there's something you want me to clarify or expand upon, I can certainly do that. But I'm sort of really thinking that once you've got clear on the problem that you're working on, it's not that hard to be able to, just apply some really good cognitive behavior therapy or self-help CBT tools and to make that work. So if you're interested in learning to become your own therapist, watch out for the Anxiety Wizard program when it becomes available in the very near future. And I look forward to interacting with you again. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen.